All right, let's dive into some thought-provoking ideas about societal and spiritual change. We're exploring the work of Eric J. Moore today, and specifically his unique take on the concept of Jubilee.
Yeah, Moore's work is not your average philosophical text. It's very personal, blending his own life experiences with, biblical interpretations and historical events. It all comes together to paint a pretty fascinating vision of transformation.
So let's break this down a bit. What exactly is Jubilee in this context? It's not a term you hear every day.
Right. So in the book of Leviticus in the Bible, Jubilee is this divinely ordained period of societal reset that happens every 50 years. It's like a fresh start, a time for a clean slate. Key elements of Jubilee include the release of slaves, forgiveness of debts, and the return of property to the original owners.
It's like hitting a giant reset button for society, bringing things back to a state of balance and fairness.
Exactly. And Moore takes this ancient concept and applies it to our modern world. He argues that many of the problems we see today, like economic inequality, racial injustice, and even things like gang violence, these all stem from our failure to really live by these principles of Jubilee.
Wow, that's a pretty bold claim. He's essentially saying that we've thrown society out of whack by ignoring these ancient principles.
He is. And to illustrate his vision of a world turned right side up, he uses this really interesting visual, an upside-down world map.
I've seen that image. It's pretty striking with, South Africa at the top. It really makes you think about global power dynamics in a different way.
Exactly. Moore sees this map as a symbolic representation of a new world order, one where the global South is elevated both literally and figuratively. He also connects this idea to the concept of Ubuntu. It's an African philosophy that emphasizes our interconnectedness as humans, the idea that I am because we are.
So Ubuntu is like the philosophical foundation of this new world order, promoting unity and a sense of shared responsibility.
You could say that, yeah. It's about recognizing that our well-being is inherently tied to the well-being of others, and that having a more equitable distribution of resources and power is essential for a truly harmonious society.
Okay, that's fascinating. But how does Moore see this new world order actually coming about? Does he offer any concrete suggestions for how we can get there?
Well, he doesn't exactly lay out a step-by-step plan. It's more about planting seeds of change, encouraging us to think differently about our world and our place in it. He calls for a Jubilee Party, which is a movement focused on putting these principles into action in modern society.
A Jubilee Party. It sounds kind of like a political movement.
It is, in a way, but it's not about traditional left-wing or right-wing politics. He wants us to transcend those divisions and find common ground in these core principles of forgiveness, release, and restoration.
So it's more about a fundamental shift in consciousness, a change in how we see ourselves and our relationship to the world.
Exactly. And Moore believes this shift begins with each individual. And he uses his own life, his own journey as an example. He talks about his experiences going from darkness into light.
You're talking about his time in the military, his imprisonment, and his eventual spiritual awakening.
Yeah, exactly. He frames these experiences as a personal journey through the principles of Jubilee, demonstrating how, even in the darkest of times, there's always potential for redemption and starting anew.
That's a really interesting way to connect his personal story to his larger societal vision.
It is. He's not just presenting abstract concepts. He's grounding them in his own life, his own struggles, and his own triumphs. It makes his ideas that much more compelling, and he's very specific in his criticisms of what he sees as societal ills.
Like his criticism of gang violence and the influence of money in politics.
Exactly. He sees these as symptoms of a world that has strayed from the principles of Jubilee. He even uses the Liberty Bell as an example, saying it's cracked because, as a nation, we haven't honored this idea of societal reset.
Wow. That's a powerful statement. He's saying America, despite its ideals, hasn't truly lived up to these principles.
Right. And this brings us to an important question. If we were to actually take Moore's ideas seriously, if we really wanted to create this Jubilee world, what changes would we need to make?
That's a big question, and I don't think there's a simple answer.
Definitely not. But maybe by digging deeper into Moore's ideas, we can at least start to imagine what a Jubilee world might look like, and maybe even start to see what role we might play in bringing it about.
Well, I'm definitely ready to learn more. Where do we go from here?
Moore delves into some really fascinating ideas about spiritual transformation and how it connects to this idea of a larger societal shift. For example, he talks about his decision to reject joining the Freemasons. He felt he had a different spiritual path.
All right, let's explore that. What was it about the Freemasons that didn't sit right with him? What was this alternative path he felt drawn to?
Well, it's interesting. Moore actually spent some time looking into the Freemasons. He even considered joining them at one point. He mentions, reading some books about them in another fraternal order, the Elks. Seems like he was genuinely curious about, like, what their role in society was and how they might fit into his own, spiritual journey.
So he wasn't just dismissive of them. He was really trying to see where they stood in relation to his beliefs.
Exactly. But ultimately, he felt pulled in a different direction. He talks about a spiritual awakening, almost like hearing the voice of God telling him he couldn't serve two masters, so to speak.
That must have been an incredibly powerful experience. Sounds like he felt that dedicating himself to a fraternal organization might compromise his commitment to his faith.
Yes, and it seems to tie into his emphasis on personal connection and the importance of family in his spiritual life. He speaks really fondly of his grandparents and the strong faith they instilled in him. He even tells the story about his grandmother's funeral where he saw a rainbow, a symbol of hope and unity, and it really left a lasting impact on him.
So it sounds like these early experiences with his family really laid the groundwork for his later spiritual awakening. Those personal connections seem to have been crucial for him.
It does seem that way. He even talks about going back to his grandmother's church, Quinn Chapel, and feeling this sense of homecoming, like he was finally where he was meant to be. It's fascinating how he weaves these personal anecdotes into his broader argument about Jubilee. He's not just talking about abstract philosophical concepts, he's grounding them in his own life, making them relatable, more human.
Right, he's showing us how these ideas actually play out in the real world through his own experiences. And it's not all positive experiences either. He's very open about some of the darker parts of his past.
You're talking about his struggles with addiction, his time in prison, even some of the challenges in his marriage.
Yeah, those difficult periods.
Yeah.
He puts it all out there. It's almost like he's saying that redemption is possible for anyone, no matter their past.
It's a powerful message for sure, especially for people who maybe feel trapped by their past mistakes. Moore seems to be saying that these principles of Jubilee, forgiveness, release, and new beginnings aren't just for society as a whole, but for each of us individually.
He's drawing these parallels between his own personal transformation and the larger societal transformation he wants to see.
Yes, and he reinforces this by connecting his experiences to biblical figures. Like Jonah. Jonah was swallowed by the whale, but he was given a second chance to fulfill his mission. It's almost like Moore sees his own life as a modern-day parable about redemption, about the potential for change.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. But he doesn't just look to the Bible for inspiration, right?
No, he also brings in these historical figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, people who dedicated their lives to fighting for social justice and equality. He sees their efforts as aligning with those principles of Jubilee, striving for a world where everyone's treated fairly, where everyone has a chance to thrive.
Yeah. So he's positioning himself within a lineage of individuals who fought for a more just world, a world where those principles of forgiveness and new beginnings are really at the forefront. And it's interesting how he also mentions the Jubilee 2000 movement, that global campaign advocating for debt relief for developing countries.
That's right. He's pointing to real-world examples of how that concept of Jubilee can be put into action, not just impacting individuals, but entire nations. He even proposes this really radical idea, like adding a Jubilee amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And this amendment would mandate a balanced budget every 50 years.
Wow, that's a really bold proposition. That really underscores his belief in those periodic systemic resets, doesn't it?
It does. He's basically suggesting that our current systems are, inherently flawed, and they need these interventions to keep them from going completely off track. And his vision isn't limited to national borders either. It really extends to that global stage we were talking about.
Right, this is where his idea of the upside-down map comes back in.
Exactly. He calls for a new world order where traditional power structures are turned on their head and the global south takes on a more prominent role. And again, he ties this back to that idea of Ubuntu, that emphasis on a more equitable distribution of resources and power.
So it's about challenging those deep-seated assumptions about who holds power and how that power is actually used.
Exactly. And while it's a radical vision, he really believes it's grounded in biblical principles and a deep understanding of human nature.
Wow.
He even sees signs that this shift is already happening if you look at current events.
You mean things like Pope Francis calling for a Jubilee of mercy and his focus on addressing things like climate change and economic inequality?
Yes, exactly. He sees those as examples of how things are starting to change. It's like Those events are a sign of this larger societal transformation that's already underway.
He certainly isn't afraid to push the boundaries of conventional thinking, that's for sure. He draws connections between biblical prophecy, current events, even quantum physics.
It's a unique blend of spirituality, social commentary, and historical analysis. It's what makes his work so interesting and thought-provoking. One element that really stands out is his critique of what he calls the capitalist underworld.
What does he mean by that?
He argues that under capitalism, this relentless pursuit of material wealth, it actually perpetuates inequality and prevents us from achieving true spiritual and economic balance. He sees this fundamental conflict between chasing money and the principles of Jubilee, which are really about compassion, forgiveness, and rejecting those traditional power structures that keep people trapped in cycles of debt and exploitation.
So he's saying our current economic system clashes with the kind of spiritual and societal transformation he envisions.
That's right. And he uses his personal transformation as an example. He talks about how his focus shifted from chasing money to seeking a deeper meaning and purpose in life.
So his personal journey is a reflection of the larger societal shift he's advocating for.
Exactly. He's showing through his own life that a change in values, a change in priorities is possible, not just for individuals, but for society as a whole.
It sounds like he's not just throwing out abstract concepts, but he's actually providing us with a roadmap, a way to understand the world and our place within it.
He even describes his writing process as a form of spiritual surgery, like he's cutting through all these layers of societal conditioning to get to a deeper truth. He's not just writing, he's engaging in a form of activism, a call to action for people who are ready to embrace a new way of seeing things.
And what does that new vision actually look like? What does he ultimately want us to do with all of this?
He challenges us to question our assumptions, to actively engage with these ideas, and to consider how we might participate in creating this Jubilee transformation. He encourages us to actually picture the world as right side up with the global south at the top, both literally and figuratively.
That's such a powerful image. It really challenges our ingrained perceptions of how global power works.
It does. And he's not just asking us to passively accept these ideas. He wants us to be active participants in shaping this more just and equitable world. He even suggests that we can start simply by changing the way we think.
So it's about changing our perspective, becoming open to new possibilities, and then, taking action based on that new understanding.
Exactly. He uses his experience with those fraternal organizations to illustrate this point. He suggests that those organizations, while they might start with good intentions, they can get caught up in their own rituals and traditions, and lose sight of the bigger picture.
I mean, he's not saying they're inherently bad, but that they can become too insular, too focused on maintaining their own structures instead of contributing to the greater good.
Right. And he contrasts that with his vision of this Jubilee Party, a movement that breaks down traditional boundaries and hierarchies. It's driven by that shared commitment to justice, to forgiveness, and to a more equitable society.
It sounds like he's calling for a revolution, but not in the traditional sense, not a violent one. More like a revolution of the heart and mind.
Yes, exactly. It's about a shift in consciousness. One that prioritizes compassion, community, and that deeper understanding of our interconnectedness. And he doesn't just leave us with these vague notions. He gives concrete examples of how to make this happen in the real world.
Like what kinds of examples?
He talks about implementing a balanced budget amendment, reforming the criminal justice system and addressing systemic issues like racism and poverty.
Those are some really ambitious goals.
They are. But Moore's point is that the principles of Jubilee can be applied to pretty much every aspect of our lives, from our personal relationships to, global politics.
He even suggests that we can apply those principles to our understanding of time itself.
That's right. He argues that biblical concept of Jubilee offers a different way of thinking about history and our place in it, not as this linear progression, but as a cyclical process of renewal and restoration.
So Jubilee is like this cosmic reset button, a way to start fresh and get back on that path toward a more just and equitable world.
Exactly. He even connects this idea to astrological phenomena like blood moons and eclipses, like they're these celestial markers that are pointing to significant changes and transformation.
It's like he's weaving together ancient wisdom and modern insights to help us see the world in this totally new way.
He is, and it's not just about these grand, sweeping societal shifts. It's about personal transformation, too. He challenges us to really look inward and to cultivate those qualities of Jubilee within ourselves.
What kinds of qualities?
He encourages us to practice forgiveness, to be generous with our time and resources, to stand up against injustice whenever we see it, and to live in a way that truly honors our connection to all beings.
So it's not just about waiting for some big societal shift. It's about embodying these principles in our own lives every single day.
Exactly. Change begins with each of us. He even suggests that we can find inspiration in unexpected places, like ancient traditions, scientific discoveries, just the beauty of nature, and even the power of human connection. Trust your intuition, listen to that inner voice, and, have the courage to follow your own unique path, even if it takes you off the beaten path.
It's a reminder that we all have a part to play in creating a better world.
Yeah.
And that our individual journeys are just as important as those larger societal shifts he's talking about.
That's a really important point. He even goes so far as to say that we should think of our lives as a kind of performance art, a way to express our unique gifts and talents and contribute to the beauty and wonder of the world.
That's a beautiful way to look at it. He's encouraging us to embrace who we are and see our lives as opportunities to really create something meaningful.
He is. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of his work. His interpretation of the Mayan calendar.
I'm curious to hear his take on that. The end of the Mayan calendar back in 2012 was a big deal, with a lot of speculation, even fear surrounding it.
Well, Moore sees that end date, 2012, not as some kind of doomsday event, but more as a symbolic marker, like a transition into a new era. And he connects it to that biblical idea of Acts 2, suggesting that just as the book of Acts describes the spread of the early Christian church, we're also entering this new phase of, spiritual awakening and societal transformation.
So instead of doom and gloom, he sees 2012 as a new beginning, like a time for positive change.
Exactly. He believes that we're moving into this period where there's a real shift in consciousness, a move away from those traditional religious institutions. It's more about a personal, experiential understanding of spirituality.
So he's placing more emphasis on personal revelation and direct communication with the divine rather than just blindly following dogma.
Right. It's this vision of spirituality that respects ancient wisdom, but is also open to the possibilities of the present. And he sees technology actually playing a pretty important role in this whole Acts 2 thing.
That's interesting. A lot of people think of technology and spirituality as being at odds with each other.
Yeah, but Moore sees it differently. He actually believes that tools like the internet, even things like artificial intelligence, they can help facilitate this spiritual and societal transformation, He suggests they can be used to raise awareness, connect people globally, and ultimately help us create a more just and equitable world.
So he's optimistic about the potential of technology to bring people together and create positive change.
He is. He even suggests that these technologies can help us better understand the universe and our place in it, which can lead to, a deeper sense of wonder and awe. It's this interesting blend of science and spirituality.
It's like he's saying that science and spirituality aren't these separate opposing forces, but they can actually complement each other.
Exactly. He encourages us to be curious and open to new discoveries, to realize that what we know about the universe is always evolving.
So this Acts 2 that he keeps talking about, does he use any kind of imagery to describe it?
He does. He describes it as this vision of holy light shining down from heaven, illuminating the path towards a more just and compassionate world.
That's a powerful image. And on a similar note, illuminating a new path, he also talks about a new Black history.
Yes, that's a central concept in his vision. He wants us to reclaim the stories and experiences of those who've been marginalized and silenced, to weave them into a inclusive and empowering narrative of human history.
So it's about acknowledging the contributions of all people, not just those in power, and really celebrating the diversity of the human experience.
Right. He sees this new Black history as being part of that larger story of humanity, the story that's been shaped by both oppression and resilience, by both darkness and light.
He also mentions a judgment day. But it doesn't sound like the traditional fire and brimstone kind of thing.
No, he doesn't see it that way. For him, it's more of a moment of reckoning, a time when we'll be held accountable for our actions and the choices that we make. But it's also an opportunity for redemption.
So a chance to sort of recalibrate, to realign ourselves with those principles of Jubilee and try to create that more just and compassionate world.
Exactly. He even ties Judgment Day to the idea of a new Christmas and a new Easter.
That's interesting. How does he reinterpret those traditional holidays?
Well, he wants us to view those holidays through the lens of Jubilee. He sees them as symbols of rebirth and hope. They represent that renewed commitment to creating a better world.
So Christmas becomes less about commercialism and more about embracing the spirit of new beginnings.
Exactly. And Easter becomes less about like a literal resurrection and more about a symbolic resurrection, like a resurrection of our own consciousness, a resurrection of our commitment to creating positive change.
It sounds like he's encouraging us to find that deeper meaning in these traditional holidays, to see them as chances for both personal and collective transformation.
He is. And to really drive that point home, make it tangible, he uses his own life experiences. He talks about his personal resurrection, his journey out of addiction and despair. He highlights how powerful faith and forgiveness can be.
He's really showing us that these aren't just abstract ideas, they can actually change lives.
Yeah, and he continues to weave together his personal experiences, those biblical interpretations and those historical events to create this really compelling and cohesive narrative.
It's like he's showing us that everything is connected. Our personal journeys are all part of this larger story of human evolution, of human transformation.
Right. And ultimately, he challenges us to embrace those principles of Jubilee in our own lives, to choose a path that's rooted in compassion and interconnection.
He calls for this Jubilee Party, a movement that transcends those traditional boundaries and divisions.
Yes. It's this collective effort to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. He envisions a world where power is shared, where resources are distributed fairly, and where those values of Jubilee are at the very core of our individual and collective lives.
It's a powerful vision, but he also acknowledges that getting to that point, achieving that kind of transformation, it requires a shift in perspective.
Yeah.
It's about changing the way we see the world.
He encourages us to literally look at the map upside down,
Yeah.
with the global south at the top. It challenges those assumptions we have about power and perspective.
It's a symbolic act, but it's one that can really change how we see the world, our place in it.
Exactly. It's about getting outside of ourselves, recognizing that we're all connected. It's about embracing the possibility of a future that's more just, more compassionate, more sustainable.
So where do we go from here? How do we take these ideas and put them into action?
Well, more suggests we start with ourselves, Cultivate those qualities of Jubilee in our own lives. Practice forgiveness. Be generous. Stand up against injustice. Just live in a way that honors that interconnection with every living thing.
He's reminding us that change starts with each of us, in our daily choices and actions.
Right. And he also suggests looking for inspiration in unexpected places, from ancient traditions to modern science, the beauty of nature, those human connections. Trust your intuition, listen to that inner voice that's guiding you, and be brave enough to follow your own unique path, even if it's off the beaten track.
It's a call to really embrace who we are, to see our lives as a gift. It's an opportunity to create something meaningful and make a positive impact on the world around us.
That's exactly it. He even suggests we think of our lives as a form of performance art. It's a way to express our unique gifts and talents, our way of contributing to the beauty and wonder of the world.
That's such a beautiful and empowering way to look at things. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Eric J. Moore's work, what are some key takeaways for our listeners today?
Moore really wants us to look beyond the surface, to see how everything's interconnected, to embrace that possibility of radical transformation, both on a personal level and a societal level. He gives us this framework for understanding the world, a lens to view current events, historical patterns, even our own experiences.
And most importantly, he reminds us that we have the power to shape the future, to create a world that embodies those values of Jubilee, justice, compassion, and a deep respect for all beings.
He leaves us with this sense of hope and that renewed commitment to building a better world. As you go about your day, think about what really resonated with you from this deep dive. What changes would you like to see in a world transformed by the principles of Jubilee? And what role are you going to play in bringing about that transformation?